Welcome to HLS training video 2013. This is the very first training video. This is kind of an introduction. I'd like you to grab a paper and a pen because before I start showing you anything, I want to get you familiar with some terms. Just like building a house, you need to know the different tools that are available to be able to construct your house. Well, we need to know what tools are available to construct our show. So some of this may be very, very simple, but if you're new to this hobby, I'll just kind of keep it simple. So the first thing are the actual lights you need, because that's what you're going to build your show to, is with lights. You can use incandescents, or you can use LED strings, which is primarily what I'm using today, are LED strings. These are strings of 50, 75, 100 count, one color, period. They're driven by a channel. Now, there's a difference in HLS of a channel and a channel as it refers to being driven by a controller. We'll defer the controller channel to later on in this discussion. There are dumb RGB strings. Those are strings of 50, 100 LEDs or pixels, but all of the pixels change to the same color. They're called dumb RGB because you can get the full spectrum of color, but all pixels exhibit the same color. You don't have specific pixel coloring capability. And then we get into pixels. A pixel is a unique element with 3 LEDs, red, green, and blue. It has a separate IC chip embedded that directly controls it, and the software and your controllers specifically control each and every individual LED. Within HLS, each of these subsets can be controlled by a single line on the grid. You don't see the grid yet, but this is the grid. A grid represents, a single row represents a HLS channel. A channel could be a single channel for a incandescent or an LED string. A single channel can be a dumb RGB. We have RGB channels. Or it could be a single pixel, which brings now to the level of hierarchy, because all of these that I talked about are the lowest level. They are individually shown and can be edited within HLS as a single row. If you jump into pixels, like your pixel megatree, you're going to find out that you're going to have thousands of individual pixels very, very quickly. HLS uses a concept called a pixel plane, which is a plane of pixels. This plane can be wrapped on itself and form a tree called a megatree. It can be laid out vertically, which is going to be called a vertical matrix. It could be laid out horizontally for a horizontal matrix. It may be a single line of pixels, like you would run around a roof line or wrap around windows or doors. Or they could be fashioned in, say, to an arch. When you take all of the pixels associated with an object and group it together, if you want to be able to program it as a single entity, it's programmed within HLS on what's called a pixel plane. And a pixel plane will be a single line in the editor. So it'll be no difference from editing a single incandescent string. That's where some of the power of HLS comes into. You manage pixels by right here. Manage pixel plane channels. This is where you're going to create a pixel plane. The preferred method is to create and assign all of your channels through this process, which I'll show you here in a little bit. Okay? If you're using an older sequence that was developed prior to 2013 with HLS, you can create your pixel plane and you can assign the individual channels to that pixel plane through this same management wizard. The next concept within HLS is called a segment. A segment, think of a segment as a virtual channel. A segment will appear on the grid, again, as a single line. You manage segments here. You assign a segment a name. You assign different HLS channels, whether they be pixels, dumb RGBs, or incandescent/LED strings to that segment. When you construct effects on a segment, that same effect is applied to all channels assigned to that effect. So, how would you use that? Quickly, let's talk about animation. Let's say you've got a talking snowman or a talking pumpkin head or a talking ghost, and you're having multiple pixels or a couple of different short LED strings that control various aspects of the mouth. Let's say you have more than one channel that has to be controlled for a specific mouth. You can create a segment called mouth, and when you turn anything on that segment, all of the channels or all of the pixels or all of the lights are going to turn on and off as designated for that segment. Different example of a segment. Let's say you're running a bunch of mini trees, and you're using red, green, and white incandescence or LED strings to run your mini trees. And some point in time, you want all the mini trees to display exactly the same effect at exactly the same time. One of the easiest ways to do that would be to create a segment and assign all of the red channels to that segment and call it a red mini tree segment, all of the green or all of the white. In doing so, as you apply a red effect, it will be applied to all of the channels assigned. Therefore, all your mini trees will behave exactly the same way. The next thing is a fill channel. This is primarily used if you're using pixels. When you draw effects, you're going to draw what you have your lighting effects. In between those effects is really considered black or no light illumination. Well, there may be times when you actually want to control the background lighting or the level or the color of the background. Instead of embedding that into the actual effect, because then it makes it very difficult to move your actual lighting effects around because you're bumping into things. So there are what's called fill channels. They're kind of like segments in the fact that you assign channels to them, but when you assign a fill effect, you won't see it on the grid. It is only presented in preview or actually in the blinky output process. It will fill all of the black area of those affected channels with what you have in the fill. The next one is a master lighting channel. A master lighting channel is given you by default. When you correct a sequence, you will automatically get a master lighting channel. Think of a master lighting channel as being on a stage and having a big throttle that controls the total light intensity of all the lights on the stage. When you draw or when you create your sequences, your effects, you kind of create them at whatever intensity levels you want. But let's say you have either at the beginning of the show you want to slowly fade up from black, or at the end of the show you want to slowly fade down to black. And you're not going to fade just certain things, you're going to fade everything. Whether it's a pixel, whether it's an incandescent, whether it's a dumb RGB. You want everything to either come up or fade down, or you want to control the overall lighting of the total show. You do that with your master lighting channel. If there's no effects on the master lighting channel, then everything is considered 100% on the individual channels. When you add an effect to the lighting channel, again, you won't see it on the grid, you'll see it in preview, or you will see it in your output blinky. It will either provide you with intensity wrapping or whatever else. So it overrides all of the intensity, so the whole show will blend as once. Sticky channels. Most people that want to use sticky channels will use what's called a beat track. In HLS, you can have multiple beat tracks. Matter of fact, you come down here and you just say, hey, treat this channel as a beat track. And all treating a channel as a beat track in HLS means that the left key or the control key on the keyboard will drop a single time tick effect onto whatever channel is called the beat track channel when you're playing music and when you have this little guy up here activated. You can have multitudes of beat tracks. You can decide. A lot of times, if you're editing multiple channels within HLS, you may want to align and control the look, the size, the structure of your effects directly to certain beats within the music. So it's nice to have the beat track visible. If you have more channels that can fit on visually on a single page, then you're going to want to slide the page up and down. Well, making a channel a sticky channel will always keep it at the top and will not let it move. So just kind of like in Excel when you can have a sticky row or a sticky column where it doesn't move. Same thing within HLS. I talked about master lighting channels. One of the things I forgot is everybody has a master lighting channel, but you could also manage what I call a submaster. A submaster, again, is a lighting channel, a master lighting channel, but not for the whole show, but for a specific group of channels. Again, just like a segment, you assign certain channels to be controlled by this sublighting, and now everything you do to that sublighting is only controlling the lighting effects to that specific set of subchannels. So for instance, if you have a megatree and you want to fade it up and fade it down and change the intensities and everything else, don't do that in your pixel plane effects, or don't do that in your tree effect, because it can be very difficult to get everything moving at the same rate, etc. You apply this submaster and it will overly control the intensity of everything associated with it. So you can do very nice ramp ups and ramps down and not worried about the individual intensities of the specific channels. Okay, that I think lays the background for all the different things. Let's see, we've covered individual channels, we've covered segments, pixel planes, fill channels, master channels, and stickies. And I briefly talked about beat track. So, how do we get started? Let's come over here to File. There is a new wizard called Let's Start a New Sequence, and I'll walk you through the steps. So you click on it. HLS is going to ask you, do you already have your song? Have you converted it to a WAV, or is it a simple MP3 file? I'll explain WAV and MP3 in just a few minutes as we get into that. Or, if you're not using a WAV file or an MP3, and you're going to have a no audio, so you're just going to have effects, are you ready? Now, I do support no audio, but you need to tell me how long that audio is going to be. And don't just say it's going to be for 15 seconds, and then 2 days later you're going to say you're going to want to make it 3 minutes, and 4 days later you're going to say you'll make it a minute and a half. Figure out how long the length is going to be and kind of assign it up front. Okay? So yes, we have our WAV file. Now it says I'm going to create a new folder under the folder that controls your HLS EXE, and that's where we'll control, or that's where we'll place all of the data files for the actual sequence. I strongly suggest that each sequence has its own folder. That way, if you want to squirrel the folder off, you can just zip up the folder. If you want to give it to somebody else, zip up the folder and send it to them. Everything will be contained within the folder. So we say yes. Now, we're asking to name our sequence. Let's call this one Music Box Dancer, since that's the name of the song that I'm using, is Music Box Dancer. So we'll say OK. HLS, you are now ready to identify the song that your sequence will use. Press yes to load the song. Press no to make this sequence without audio. So this is where we're taking the fork in the road. Press yes if you're going to use a song. Press no if you're going to do a no audio sequence, so it's just going to be an effects sequence, or hit cancel and bail out altogether. So we're going to hit yes. This is where we acquire the audio. Now, unlike many of the other sequencers in the industry, HLS design is designed from the very beginning to be totally integrated with audio. Everything it does is integrated with audio. When I work effectively with WAV files. The reason is MP3s and all those other ones are just means of compressing the size of the file. But in order to use it, you have to uncompress it. And as I said, I am tightly integrated, so I have to get right down to every individual audio tick that is required to synchronize the effects with the audio. So I deal with a WAV file. The best way to do it is go out on the web and find a MP3 to WAV file that produces what I'll consider an acceptable WAV file. Okay? What is an acceptable WAV file to load? Number one, it must be stereo. So if you're going out doing your own talking, you need to record it in stereo. Number two, it has to be at CD recording rates, 44,100 kilohertz. That's what it needs to be at. I'm looking for CD quality recording. Again, the quality of the recording is how many samples per second is in the audio, and it must be 44,100. The WAV file should not contain any other non-audio embedded, we'll call them segments. WAV files can embed a whole bunch of stuff. I will try to remove them, but if I don't, I'll complain and I'll tell you about it. In this little box right here, when we load the audio file, I will tear apart the audio. I'll tell you what I found, and I'll tell you what I don't like. Now, I've implemented an MP3 converter here. It is not a real robust MP3. It will not convert 100% of every MP3. It's kind of there so that it'll take 95% of the MP3s, but it won't take them all. So the best way is to go out on the web, do your WAV conversion, bring your WAV in, or you can try my MP3. My MP3 may fault on you, okay? So there's a lot of different things that can go on in an MP3 file, and I'm not taking care of all of them. So we're going to load my WAV file. It's going to ask me where my WAV file is. And I know that this is the folder that contains my WAV file. Come on. There's my WAV file. And there's Music Box Dancer. Now, HLS is loading. You can see here I've torn it apart. It has two channels, means it's stereo. Here's the 44,100 samples per second. It is 16-bit stereo, another must, okay? Here's all the information. So I like this file, I recorded it, and I displayed it. If you don't see any audio up there, it may be because the file you had a bunch of dead space at the beginning of the file. If it does, I strongly suggest you use an outside source like Audacity or something like that. Remove that dead space. Why have that dead space at the beginning of the song? You may also want to look at the end of the song and remove dead space at the end of the song. So now we've loaded our audio file, we can say, I'm done. And I've automatically saved it for you. The next step in creating a sequence is we need some channels. We talked about all the various different ways of getting channels. Let us come. So to do that, we come to Manage Channels. This is the Manage Raw channel. This is the main manager for adding and removing all the channels except pixels in your sequence. Let us say that one of the things we want to do is to build an arch. But this arch is going to be done out of incandescent strings or LED strings. And let's say we're building a 9-segment arch. So we need 9 controllable segments for that arch. Come up here, and we're going to say, I need 9 channels. Now, if you notice, I've already added the master lighting for you. That's automatically, you can't get rid of it. It's always there. So we're going to add these 9 channels. It's going to ask, hey, what name of it? What is the name? Let's say I'm having multiple arches. So I'm going to call this Arch 1. Now, it says here that if I put a parenthesis and a number, it'll allow me to tell me where I want to put the another sequence number. So I'm going to put underscore parentheses 1 close parentheses. This 1 says my channel count is going to start at 1. If I put 10, the channel count would start at 10. So I'm defining my object, which is my first arch, and I'm saying I need 9 of them, and I want my starting channel at 1. And here we go. So I've got arch 1, and I got channel 1 all the way up through 9. Now, if you notice, boy, that immediately filled this thing up, and we only got 9 channels on it. So how can we control the amount of stuff? You think about Windows. In Windows Explorer or My Computer, you've got the ability of having folders where you can stick a bunch of files in, so you only see a folder, you don't see all the individual files. Well, we do the same thing here in HLS. We have folders. And that's what this aspect up at the top is for my folder control. Let's create an arch folder. We're going to create an arch folder to put arch 1 in. The way you can do it is you highlight what channels are going to be associated with the folder command. So I can click on these. If I click on them, I can take them off or I can turn them on. Now, if I'm just doing 9 clicks, that's not bad. But if you're doing a mega tree and you got 1,000 of them, if it's pixels or something like that, that could get a little tedious. So most of what's on this page, I have what I call shortcut buttons, which means you select a group of channels. Now, when you select, you click on the left mouse, you pull the left mouse down, it highlights a group. I really don't care what column you highlight. The column you highlight doesn't matter. It's the rows that are associated with this highlight that matters. I just happen to pick channel. I could have come over here and I could pick universe. I could come over here and pick color. I could pick dimming curve. It doesn't matter what column I'm highlighting. I'm really identifying the rows. Once I've done that, I can say copy to folder. This does not copy to the folder. This simply flags what channels here are going to be associated with the copy or with the move to a folder process. So I've now identified 9 channels are going to be associated with a folder move. I got to create a folder. Boy. So let's just call let's call the folder Arch 1. So I clicked on Add Folder. I'm calling it an Arch 1 folder. There's a checkbox here for a super folder. Don't worry about that now. We'll get in that in just a minute. If you notice, I now have a blue Arch 1. Blue identifies that it is a folder that will contain channels. I still have my 9 that are in green over here. They're flagged to move. If I say move to folder, I've got to come back here and select. Copy. Remove. I hit the wrong one. Sorry about that. Paste to folder is in red. When I click it, it turns green, which means the paste to folder action is active. I haven't completed it yet because I haven't told what folder to paste these in. I'm going to paste it in this arch. I move it by simply clicking on the first column, the plus plus. When I do a left mouse click, all of those have now been moved into the arch folder. And the paste to folder has gone from green back to red, which means it is no longer active. If I want to see what's in there, I simply left click on arch and I can see all my associated channels, just like you do in Windows. If I click on arch again, it goes away. Let us say I'm creating a second arch. So let's create 9 more channels. This will be called arch 2. Again, I'm going to do my underscore. I'm going to do a 1 because I want my channels associated with arch 2 to start at 1. So I say OK. Now I have all of my arch 2 channels. Let's create another folder called arch 2. Let's assign all of these. Now I'll come over here. I come down and pick up my 9. I say copy to folder, which does nothing more than identify that these channels are associated with a folder move. I say paste to folder. It turns green, which means it's waiting for me to tell it what folder to assign it to. And I assign it to arch 2. And if you know, they're alphabetized now. Now, if we have multiple arches, well, geez, we're going to have arch 1, arch 2, arch 3, arch 4, and we're going to have a bunch of arches sitting down here. We may not want a bunch of arches. Let's say from this management point of view, we want to put all the arches into one folder because as your show builds, you're going to be getting possibly thousands of channels. So you're going to want to manage it a little bit more. So let's add another folder called all arches, and that's what will contain all our arches. So now we come up to go add folder, and we'll call this all arches. Okay, now this is going to be a super folder. A super folder only holds folders. It cannot hold channels. So a super folder holds folders, which is exactly what we're looking for. We hit OK. Now we've got all arches. Again, I come down. I'm going to individually select these now. I didn't use my copy to folder. I do a paste to folder. I come over and I click on all arches, and it is now a super folder. It changes colors to show you that it actually has folders in it. So how do I get at all this stuff? I have a single line here that says all arches. If I click on it, it shows me its subfolders. If you notice, they're not blue anymore. They're identifying that they're associated with this super folder. If I click on it, it will expose everything. So you now have a hierarchy method of being able to do this internally. So now we have our arches. You can do the same thing with everything else. You can let us build, let's build kind of like 2 megatrees, or we'll start to build it. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because I'll just show you the process. It can get somewhat tedious. But just like we did arches here, if you're building, okay, let's say you're doing let's say you're building a incandescent or LED megatree. That's kind of like what I have. I don't have any pixels, so I've got LEDs. So let us say that my megatree is going to hold 32 strings. So I come up here, again, do 32. And I'm going to add them. And I'm going to call them LED Mega Tree. Just like that. I'm going to do an underscore. I'm going to do a channel 1. Now I've got all my mega trees. So I have all of my 32 strings with my mega trees. I'm going to create a folder. It's going to call it LED Mega Tree. I'm going to assign them all. Copy, paste, assign. Now I've got them all. As you're building a new sequence, I suggest you start using the folders in that to help organize and manage your channels in that matter. So that's how you would do a incandescent megatree. Now, if you have, let's open this up. So let me talk about RGB real here quick. So let's just say that we've got a mini tree, and we've got a single RGB channel on that mega tree, on that mini tree. I'm going to call it, we'll just call it Mini 1. We'll call it, I'm only doing this, I wouldn't call it dumb pixel, but I'm just M-I-N-I. I'm just doing this. This is not what I would name it, but I'm just doing this for the tutorial. So I'm calling it Mini 1 dumb pixel. Now, this is a single channel going to the output. When I click RGB, I've now said that is actually, when we're talking about how we're going to interface with your lights and your controllers, that is now 3 channels. That is a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. But with an HLS, it is still a single channel, except that you can draw all the spectrum of colors you want. So this is how you identify that you have an RGB channel. Let us save this for a minute, because we're going to jump into pixels real quick. Let us say you're building a mega tree out of pixels. Let's say your tree is going to be composed of 32 strings, and you're using 40 pixels per string. So come up here to pixel plane, manage channel. Select a pixel plane channel. We don't have one yet, so we're going to click new. Create a pixel plane in channel. Number of strings. This is where you tell me how many physical strings are going to create either the vertical runs on your tree, or the number of vertical runs or horizontal runs on your vertical or horizontal matrix. We said we were running 32 vertical strings at 40 pixels per string. It just does it calculate. If you can see here, that is 1,280 individual pixels. If you want to know how many channels that's controlling, physical channels out at a controller, it's 3 times that. Let's give it a name. We're going to call it Megatree. I can't spell. We'll call it Pixel just to keep it identified. So I now have a pixel plane, and it's called Megatree Pixel. I want to call it a Megatree though, and I'm going to assign the type of Megatree. Now, when you're here, if you are building a Megatree and those 32 channels were the whole tree, then you would put 32 here. But let's say you're putting 32 channels and it's only 1/2 of the tree. You're making 32 vertical channels, but you're composing it and you only want it to be the front half of the tree. The back half is empty. Or you're using 32 channels to build a 270-degree tree. However many it is, This number, because I use this in the pixel plane editor, this number has to be the number of channels, or the number of vertical channels, vertical strings, excuse me, I misappropriately used the word channel. The number of strings, the vertical strings in the megatree that would make up a complete 360 tree, even though you may not be using a 360. I told you here we would be using a complete 360 tree at 32 strings. Again, this is just, and we're using 40. And I can do OK. So I've now saved that, and I am done. When I come back to Manage Channels, now you will see there is a pixel plane megatree. It automatically created a folder, and it has all of the pixel plane channels in there. Here's every one of the channels. And if you notice, they're already marked as RGB. So now that we have these, let's expose this, not that, let's collapse it back on up. Let's move across and see what other things are in this channel manager. Universe. It starts out where everything has a 0 universe. Let's use arches here for a minute. Let's use arch 2. This universe and channel column, this is what's used when you start getting ready to export your HLS channels out to a controller. You don't have to worry about controllers up front. HLS is designed for editing your sequence, and assigning controllers and those things are on the back end. But you've got to be aware of them. Everything that has a universe of 0 will never, I repeat, never be able to be sent out to blink lights. So, your beat tracks are 0. Your pixel planes are 0. Your segments are 0. Any channel that you create with an HLS to be used as a reference, keep it as 0. And it will not be applicable to be sending out to an output. So if we want, let us just say these 9 are going to be going out to a Renard channel. And I want to make them all. Remember I said that I have hot buttons that do certain things? This one says renumber the selected universe. I'm going to make all of these universe 1. And if I click that, if you notice now they're all universe 1. Don't worry about channel count. You don't control this. I control this. And I'll show you how. This channel is actually the DMX channel that is going to be used when we go out and start sending these channels out to our controllers. When I renumber for output, it's doing that process right now. It's got to go through all the pixel planes and everything else. If you notice now, everything is in sequence. So I have channel 1 through 9 on universe 1. This is the information that would be used being sent out to your Renard controllers, to your E131 controllers, or whatever type of controller you have. Channel count for a universe always starts at 1, and it goes up to a maximum of 512. If you have RGB channels in your universe, you cannot split an RGB channel. So most of you that are running E31 with pixels, you're only going to have 510 channels that are going to be. You're going to lose 2 channels because you can't break an RGB channel by 2 and by 1. Now, here's what's important. Let's say they were RGB. Let's say that all of a sudden I want to make them RGB. Remember, I can select this. Here's another hot button down here. Set selection RGB flag. I can come down and set that, and now they're all RGB channels. What happens to my channel count? I must click this button here. This is very important. You must do this to ready the channels for output. Because watch what happens when I click it. I go back. I rework all of the channel counts. I'll return here. Now if you notice, The DMX channel counts are 1, 4, 7. HLS knows that this RGB is actually 3 physical channels when it talks to a controller, so it automatically assigns the DMX channel. You have to have DMX channels in sequence. So if you're running a Renard and you got a couple of dead channels, you have to insert dead channels. You just can't jump and skip between channel counts. They have to be sequential, and there has to be a physical channel for each one. So you'll have to put in some dumb channels. If we come over here, you'll see a color. If we're dealing with, doesn't matter whether it's incandescents or LEDs, we want to know the color that we're going to be driving. I use, let's say, red LED. I want to know that that channel is associated with a red LED. You can come up here in this, you can pick colors here. I can make it red, green, let's just make it green. It's now green. That signifies that when I'm right-click on this color cell, it'll make it green. If I come over here and make it blue, and I right-click here, I'll make it blue. This is the color associated with the channel in the editor. If you got pixels, you can change the pixels. Any pixel can be a different color, but this is the default color associated with the channel. We've talked about RGB. Dimming curves. You're going to find with incandescents or LEDs that the light, perceived light linearity of red, green, and blue are not the same. You can have some very nice colors looking very nice on your computer, and they look kind of putrid when they're out there in real, on your real show. And that's because the amount of light that is being emitted by your red, green, and blue do not have the same linear effect. A dimming curve modifies that output intensity. You can take your time within HLS, and you can generate a dimming curve for red, for green, for blue. You can actually combine 3 dimming curves and call it an RGB dimming curve. And you can have as many dimming curves as you want, because a red LED from one pixel controller may not have the same lighting intensity slope curve for a red LED for another manufacturer. So HLS gives you the ability of matching and controlling the dimming curves so you can get better color coordination. You select your dimming curve by here and here. This is a blue dimming curve, a green, a red, and this happens to be an RGB dimming curve. I could take a green dimming curve. Now it's here. Now when I've only got dimming curves up there. Oh, that's it. I could come here and say, okay, that's my dimming curves. Remember, there's a hot button. This is going to say assign this dimming curve to everything there. So if I do that, I got to go back and look at that. That didn't work right. Okay? So this, did I do that right? Oh, yeah, I did. I clicked the wrong button. Nope. Okay, I found a bug. So these dimming curves will allow you to put this up. So that's the difference between when you're designing and when you're actually using. I got to step through this, and that's a little bug, so I'll take care of that. But that's how you're going to effectively assign multiple dimming curves to multiple, or the same dimming curve to multiple channels. If I right-click again, I can come up here, and that is an RGB channel. Is that RGB? Yeah, so that's RGB right now. So I could come up and I could assign an RGB dimming curve. There, I've assigned a dimming curve. Here's order. When I click this renumber, it's important that when you're viewing this, they are shown in the exact sequence order, because this is what I use for generating sequence numbers, is physically how they align. Let us say that for some reason we did an import, maybe an import from Vixen or an import from LOR, and the channels weren't really organized real well and properly, and they're kind of mixed up. let's say that in reality, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are really 1, 2, 3, and 4, and these three are the opposite. I give you the ability of swapping orders around. This order number is really not important as long as it's sequential. So I'll do this. And now if you look down here, it says reorder. It's just by 1 by default. So if I do this, reorder, if you notice, it's now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I come up here and I'm going to select these, and I'm just going to come down here and say 10. Now if I do reorder, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I have 10, 11, 12, 13. Again, the number's not necessary, it's the sort order. So when I hit refresh, they will get resorted so that they're in proper alignment. Let's hit refresh. Now, they are over here in proper sequence. So, when I turn around and hit renumber for output, if you notice, now the DMX channel is now properly organized for physically how they're laid out. So, the order channel, this ordering capability allows you to manipulate the order of any of your channels so that you can properly prepare them for the output process. Folder, that just kind of tells you what folder number they're associated with. It's just in there for information. Multiple DMX. There is several devices out there that are kind of non-standard. They take 4,096 channels, but they're treated as a 1. So in HLS, you would identify it as, if we come over here to Universe, when we did Universe, we'd make sure that we selected all 4,096. What we need to do is we need to tell HLS, because remember, a universe in DMX is only 512. We need to tell HLS that, hey, this is one of these unique ones that are multi-DMX group. You would come in here and select these, all of those channels as a multiple DMX group. Then HLS will take those 496 and properly divide those into multiple universes and multiple channels per universe. Type of control, this is if you add controls down here, these are special controls. Trigger allows you to do, runs a BAT file or an EXE file. It's word or mouth positions. If you're doing animation, that's where you add those specific control channels, and it would tell you here. If you're not really dealing with RGB, but you're dealing with GRB, you can right-click, and you can turn around and say, that's really, when I come to output, that is a GRB channel. Preview. Here's my preview. Got preview group and preview number. You can kind of think about them almost like your DMX universe and channel, but these are associated with the preview. Once you get your preview, once you draw your preview, you will assign a group and a channel number to each element in your preview, just like you're connecting up channels to controllers. This is where you tell me what they are. Now, there are some things down here that will aid you in that. So, we have our 9 arches. Let us say for a preview, this is going to be group 1. So I've now made it group 1. I'm coming down here, and this is going to be preview number starting at 1. Now it's 1 through 9. So I've now displayed, I now have preview group 1 and 1 through 9. These become important when you build your preview, because this is what you'll tell me how to associate this channel with your preview. Now let's come down here to this pixel plane megatree. Let's open it up. That's why I clicked it. So it's now we've got a pixel plane megatree. We could go through this pixel plane megatree here And we could identify, pull it down, do group 1, pull it down, group channel 1 through 30, 1 through 40. Then group 2 or group 3, etc., etc. That is where this preview group number wizard comes in. So we come down here, and we need to select everything. So I'm just holding the left mouse key down, and I've pulled, and I now have my complete megatree. If you do help, it'll tell you how you can do this. It also says here, start group. It'll cycle, start group at the group number, and then cycle every n channels. Let's say that for some reason, I want my megatree, my pixel megatree, from a preview perspective to be group 10. And remember, there are 40 pixels per string. So my first string is going to start at group 10. The next group will be group 11. And I have 40 pixels. When I click on this, now the shortcut has automatically. So I've got, here's my group 41, and there's my pixel 40. And if I look, it automatically assigned them all. What you want to make sure is, I didn't want to start at 1 because I've already got a group 1. You need to keep your groups separately. I leave that up to you. I don't do a lot of checking for that. I leave that for you. So that's how you use this preview group, kind of a wizard to help do this. The last two are display X and display Y. They're in this training video right now. These will be filled in from preview. They're not implemented yet. When they're filled in from preview, they will share, or they will tell me, the XY coordinates of this particular channel with respect to your show. These are editable within here, so you can make slight modifications. This information will be used in a new feature that's coming in HLS, which will be a single channel, which will be a show channel. So it's primarily used for pixels. You'll be able to do color sweeps from left to right across your whole show, or from top to bottom, things of that nature. They're primarily associated with shows that use pixels, but it will allow me to do effects to every pixel and change that effect depending on their XY coordinates within your show. We've talked about renumber. We've talked about, I can come over here. Let's say you've done an import from Vixen or LOR, and they come in with some really, with channel names that may no longer be appropriate, because you may have had, trying to simulate RGB in Vixen, so you had string 1 R, string 2 B, string 1 green. And when you do the RGB conversion, you're left with a bunch of channels that, they're not really appropriate anymore. So let's say you want to change the name of them. You come over here and click on these. Oh, it won't let you change the name. You can click up here and unfreeze the name. Just jumped. Now my names are unfrozen. Let us get rid of this pixel plane here. Oh, got to freeze it. Folder activity only works when you're frozen, so remember that. So now we're going to unfreeze it. Now I've got my channels, and I've got my names. I can come in, and I can change this. I can make it 1 if I wanted to. Okay? Here's the other thing. So I can come in and I can manipulate these individually. I just wanted to show you can manipulate them individually. We go ahead and we freeze them again, and now these channels are clickable channels. They're not editable channels. But we come down here. So let's assume for this that these are all, if you notice, these are all different names. Remember, we changed the listing over here. Let's say we want to go back and we want to get these so the names are now appropriate with the listing. We have a rename selected channels. Again, this is a multi-channel selection wizard. Here's a little help. It tells you about the various things you can do. Very simply, I'm going to call it, well, we'll call it arch2 underscore 1 again. It's the same kind of shortcut I used over here. When I do this, now, if you notice, I've changed all the names. So that's how this shortcut helps you do things with multiple channels. We've talked about preview group, export file. I won't talk about it now, but that effectively exports everything in every channel, and it will allow you to manipulate that data out in Excel and then import that modified data back in. So you don't have to sit here and work within the channel manager. You can work within Excel. It'll also be used here in the near future as a very quick way of starting a new sequence and totally importing a channel layout from a previous saved sequence. Not there now, but it will be in the very near future. Deleting a channel. You have various ways you can delete a channel. If we wanted to delete this mini tree, all I do is right click. Are you really sure I want to delete it? I say yes, and it'll be gone. Now, when I delete a channel, as soon as I exit here, it's going to shut HLS down, because deleting stuff makes a big processing mess with all of the background data. And the way that I guarantee it's all handled properly is to shut HLS down and then bring it back up from the beginning. Before we leave, let's talk about let's say I don't want this folder anymore. I can right click on the folder and the folder's gone. Now all these arches are no more folders. I can do the super folder and they're all gone. So if you right click over here, if you right click on folders, it's not going to ask you if you made a mistake. I should probably change that. Because it's just going to take it away on you. I think I'll change that. I do ask you for instance, I ask you there, but I'm not asking you for folders. So I'm going to make that change to do that sanity check on a folder before it's deleted. If you want to delete a group of files, let's say that I don't want my arches at all. I can come down here and do those 9. Now it says delete selected group of channels. Are you sure? Yes. Now all of them are gone. And I think we've covered just about everything to cover now on the Manage Channel Manager. When I say done, must shut down, and we are now gone. Let's bring it back up. Oh, you're inside my editor now because it shut it on down. So I'm bringing it back up. When you start HLS, open a sequence. This is my recent file. It will give you a list of sequences that you've recently worked on. We were working on Music Box Dancer. Click on that and we're okay. If you delete one, let's say I delete Wizard. Wizard is no longer. I deleted the folder, but it's still in my recent folders. How do I get rid of it? I hit Wizard, I hit Remove, and now Wizard is gone from my recent folder. I hit Music Box, and I will now bring up my Music Box. Before we stop this training, we have now created a bunch of channels. How do I see them? I still don't have anything on my edit grid. There is a hierarchy. Remember, you have these thousands of channels right now. How do we limit what we work on? How do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one bite at a time. How do you develop a show? One channel at a time, or small groups of channels. Remember, I said groups of channels. So when you're under Channel Manager, select channels and display a display group. We have an arch. Let us say I want to work on my arch. Here is my arch down here. I want to call this my arch 1. So the only thing I want to work on right now is arch 1. So I select my arch. I do my wizard. Now they're all checked. I've given it a name for arch 1, and I hit save. I've now created a display group. It's not up because I can have multiple display groups. So you can create any number of display groups. Each display group can contain any channel you want. So they can contain, you can have a single channel like a beat track. You can have it in 4 or 5 different display groups. Manage channel. Now, here's the display group I want to work on. I've only got one display group, so we're going to click Arch 1. Ah, I finally got channels on my screen. I'm going to stop this training video now. We've now created RGB channels, pixel planes, other things, and we have now presented them so they are up on the editor grid. That completes this training video for the introduction to HLS 2013. Enjoy.